have specific ethics bowl courses in relation to those coaches that don't, that it's purely an extracurricular activity. One of the first questions that oftentimes I'm asked is about recruiting. How do you recruit students to be either in your ethics bowl class or either on your ethics bowl team? And I'd be really interested to know kind of some of the approaches that maybe some of you take for that. I know that for those of us who teach or coaching ethics bowl teams on an extracurricular level, it's sometimes a little bit harder. So recruiting for my school, for example, luckily we've been doing ethics bowl at San Jose State since really kind of the beginning of the early regions in the late 90s. So I actually have a lot of colleagues in different departments that will oftentimes send me students' names or have students come to me and talk to me about whether or not they, are interested in the ethics bowl or what the ethics bowl is. But I'm interested to know if any of you have certain strategies that you take for recruiting. One of the things that I always like to do is I try to recruit freshmen coming in or sophomores. Some of the better teams are often those that have had students that have worked together for multiple years. So you can really see that as it kind of parses out in like the national competitions. I always generally like to try to have some type of veteran that comes back that knows how the ethics bowl actually works to really help those newer students that are moving along. But I spend a lot of time actually talking to students and recruiting students individually for my courses. Other faculty members will do the same thing. You might have students that has certain propensity for public speaking or really likes ethical debate or really likes, to talk about ethical issues. And so I might try to really focus in on those students. But I'm curious, this kind of really, maybe we can start this conversation by really thinking about how people recruit. And I think, Richard, you had your hand up first, so I'll let you jump in there.
Yeah, great. So my approach is sort of three-pronged, but I'll just briefly mention two. I talk to students, I target students who I think could be good at it, and I make announcements in my classes. But the one thing I wanted to mention that I do that might be different from some of the others is each year at the start of the year, I have an ethics bowl informational meeting, and I send out an announcement through the university's university-wide announcement system. So students in all the colleges, not just in the philosophy classes, get word. And then I bribe them with pizza to come. And that's, it doesn't end up being most of my students or most of the teammates, but every year I get one or two that wouldn't have heard about it otherwise, and they'll join and be involved sometimes for several years. So an informational meeting with, food, pizza and soda pops and things like that. And I just sort of make it clear, come and find out about it, no commitment required. And then I sign people up at that meeting after sort of detailing the process.
Great. Larry? You're on mute, Larry.
I really raised my hand to ask a question. I'd like to hear from any students, if there are any students here, how they got into Ethics Bowl. But on my end, I'll just say I'd like to expand this beyond, and I'm trying right now to get the Honors College interested in Ethics Bowl, because I think it's a great thing for honor students and really good students to have the opportunity to do this. I send an email at the end of every semester to everyone I give an A to in my 101 classes, and most of my Ethics Bowl students really come out of that. I send them a link to the website, and I send them a link to the most recent cases, and I say, take a look at this and see if you want to do it. And I get enough to put a team together out of it. And that's sort of, but that's the difference between the way I'm doing it and the way a lot of people are doing it as a class, is I'm doing it as something that's a really next step in philosophy. If you're really good at philosophy, here's what you can do with it.
See, one of the things that I do as well is I try to recruit multiple majors. So obviously I work in a philosophy department, but I really like to have, let's say, a business major or an engineering major or a science major or social sciences or political science. And I think that oftentimes having students with different academic backgrounds really helps move the conversation forward, because they're going to be coming from, slightly different perspectives, so on and so forth. And so I find that some of my better teams have been really mixed in terms of who, what is their academic background. But I think it's also a really interesting question, Larry, and I know we have quite a few students on here. So it might be interesting to hear maybe from some of the students how you were recruited into the Ethics Bowl. Was it because you had a friend that did it? Did you have a professor that came in and, tried to recruit you personally? Were you recommended? So if there's any students that have any comments, that would be wonderful as well. Will Parker, I think I saw your name up.
Hi, so yeah, actually I was recruited for my high school's Ethics Bowl team, so I'm now a rising senior. And so at the end of my sophomore year, I got an email from the Ethics Bowl coaches saying that my history teacher recommended me to be part of the team. And so last year was my first year on the team. It was a great experience. We made it all the way to nationals. So I see a few familiar faces here. But yeah, honestly, one of the best things that happened to me, and I look forward to continuing the Ethics Bowl journey in college once I get there. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's excellent. Any other students that might want to chime in? I don't know. John Garcia, you're not a student, but go for it.
Yeah,
Raise your hand
definitely
up.
not a student. Yeah, definitely not a student, but just a quick thought. I think Ron, and there may be a couple other people from two-year schools, we have an unusual situation because, and Will, was your comment that made me think of this, we don't have 4 years, right? So we can't recruit a sophomore who's gonna then be there in 2 years. So we have to find ways to sort of supercharge the front end. And so one thing that we'll try to do occasionally is find ways to have public Ethics Bowl related events, or a match or a mock match or something like that, just as a way to get people to understand what it is. So like, having two classes compete against each other in a public space and inviting both of those classes and other classes that meet at that time, it allows you to get it in front of 100 students or something like that all at once. And that can be helpful if you're sort of like really struggling to get in front of as many students as quickly as possible.
All right, Michael.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, and it's unfortunately not something we can do a lot with as instructors or coaches, but one of the most effective recruiting tools is students recruiting other students.
Yes.
And this past year, I was really fortunate to have a couple of students on my team who got really engaged with organization and leading the team, and they're going to do some like tabling at student organization fairs at the beginning of this term to try to recruit more students. And I expect that that's going to be actually a lot more effective than anything that I've done.
Yeah, so at my university, we do something similar. At the very beginning of school, there's all the different clubs, and we generally try to set up a table as well and do something similar to what Richard does. Then I'll have like an informational meeting. One of the things that I try to do, especially as a coach of really more of an extracurricular activity, is I really try to stress to the students how much time commitment that it actually takes. I try to stress to students that this is like taking another class. So the expectation is really the same in terms of the amount of work that they're going to be doing. Generally, my students meet twice a week for a couple hours, and so I meet with them, and then they meet, on their own externally as well. Generally, as we get closer to the competition, they start to meet independently without me much more as they start to get more and more nervous, and the realization that competition is coming at any moment. Yeah, so recruiting can be a little bit difficult. I'm wondering, for some of you who run classes, are you recruiting students to take those classes, or are you just hoping that students that they need those units, they're going to jump into that class, and then you're just going to try to pull people from that? So anybody that actually has a class, how do you approach that?
Well, I can jump
Robert.
in.
Oh, go
Oh.
ahead, Deborah.
Robert, go ahead, because you and I are going to say the same thing.
You're on mute, Robert.
Maybe we won't be saying the same thing, but participation in Ethics Bowl in our program, it's a necessary condition that you enroll in the Ethics Bowl class. So I market enthusiastically amongst my 100 level classes, my 300 level ethics classes that I teach that students will enroll in the ethics bowl class, and I actively try to get to them to enroll in the class. And I make it clear that if you enroll in the class, you are then you can participate in the ethics bowl team, and doing that sort of motivating work and that sort of marketing work, I find has helped quite a bit. That was the one thing I wanted to just lead off with.
All right,
So
Deborah?
this is great. We weren't going to say the same thing,
Yeah.
so that's perfect. So one of the things that I think is kind of unique about our program is that we do have the class, and then we market the class to the Honors College. And because the class is part of our general education program, it's not an ethics bowl class. It's Introduction to Ethical Policy Debates. And so any student who wants to get better at public speaking, who is interested in public policy questions, interested in political questions and law, we market to those students. So we do a presentation to the Honors College. We started for the first time last fall, trying to get Honors College students to be more interested and to take those classes. We'll see if those enrollments go up this year. We're starting something new. Robert's going to be doing it for the first time this fall. Our honors program has a class called a conversations course, and it's a 1 credit hour class. And so they've agreed to let us do a pilot where Robert's going to be teaching ethics bowl cases in this 1 hour conversations class. And so we're hoping that that will also drive more interest in the ethical policy debates course, which is then what builds out interest in the ethics bowl classes. We also do a bunch of events on campus that are surrounding ethics bowl, and we do a huge event called the Great Debate every year, which brings in about 100 students, where we really get faculty from across campus to give extra credit to their students to attend. So that's a fantastic sort of advertising and driver for students to learn more about ethics bowl. It's definitely true that they hear about it and they bring their friends in, but it also really helps when you have an event where they can see what it is, and then they get excited about that too. So we're trying lots of new ideas to drive more activity, and I'm hoping we'll have positive things to report next year.
Excellent. Krista, I think you were next.
Yeah, just answering how the class thing works. So for me, my first year I tried to have an ethics bowl team without a class. I just couldn't get traction. I couldn't get commitment from people for the amount of time it would take, and we registered and didn't go. And so then I approached with just taking our applied ethics course and just saying, I'm going to teach this as ethics bowl. And then you're able to get students because for credit, they're already preparing, right? And everybody gets something out of it, whether they knew they were doing it or not. I mean, most students day one, we advertised the course, but most students in that class went, wait, what is this? But it worked. We tricked them into it, and they really had a great time. And so that I feel like helped jumpstart to the next year. The other thing I wanted to add, and it's similar to Deborah talking about the 1 credit, we're lucky enough that we have these 1 credit mini courses, because my worry was that once someone's taken Philosophy 312, we want them to be a repeat ethics bowl participant, but they've already taken the class and they can't take it for credit twice. And so my course is actually co-listed with a 1 credit mini course, which students can take time and time again. And those courses are pass fail, so they don't have to do any of the grading stuff, but the expectation is that they come during the portion of the class that's dedicated to preparing for the ethics bowl. And then they'll do that alongside the regular class, which is a mix of students who knew what they were getting into, ones that didn't, but then now you also have some. So it might be a unique model just because my university can do it. But it's traditional credit, and then students just find it and come to enjoy it, hopefully. So
a quick follow-up question. So let's imagine that you have, 15 or 20 students that sign up for that class. How do you make the determination of which one of those students is actually going to participate in the bowl?
So far, it was kind of no one's required to do it. And so let me know if you're interested. And I haven't had too many. Our region says, you can request to take 2 teams. So the thought is that if we, if we needed to take 2 teams, we live close enough to regionals that it's financially feasible. And I can't imagine getting more than 10, but I think that'll be a good problem to have if it comes to it. So we'll see how it goes as the program builds. But right now it's been a non-issue. So we're just kind of rolling with it.
So before I go to Ron, I think you had your hand up still. You're good? Okay, so before Robert, is your hand up again? Okay, so before we go, there was a message in the chat by John. Does anybody use independent study as a way to get credit for Ethics Bowl involvement? And that's actually something that we do at San Jose State. We have some upper division independent study courses, and my students, if they need an extra unit, I'll sign them up for that. And they can do an independent study to be able to get that unit, but we have a limitation on what the limits are or what the unit values are for those. But that has been really helpful for some of the students, especially if they need like an extra unit for graduation or something, we can put them in the independent study. Robert, I think you were next.
Yeah, I just had a follow-up to the point Krista made, because she had said that she offers the 1-hour class as sort of a piggyback on to the sort of Ethics Bowl geared class in her program. And we have something similar in the way that it's structured here at University of Mississippi. The General Ethical Policy and Debates class is a 200 level, but once you've completed that, you can then, that functions as a prerequisite for a 300 level Advanced Ethical Policy Debates course, which has some different work that the students will do, but it meets contemporaneously. And of course, being able to do that is something which depends on the institution in question, but it enables students to come back and also satisfy further course requirements, get credit hours, and also stay involved in Ethics Bowl. And you get those repeat students who have the experience of having competed, which I think has worked out really nicely for us.
All right, excellent. Jess.
Yeah, I just wanted to boost whoever asked, if you have a big class and you can't take everybody to Ethics Bowl, but Ethics Bowl is within the class, if anybody's managed that, I'm curious, because the way it's set up for me, it's a one-shot elective, so we're not going to have repeat students that are able to take it, but the elective has 16 people in it, and so I'm wondering how to navigate that.
I might ask Kyle Roberson. I know that you oftentimes have more students in your class than participate.
Sure, I can chime in. I mean, it really depends on the year. So just a couple of details of how my class is different. I am not tenured, I'm a lecturer, so I can't do independent studies at all. That would cost extra budgeting money. That's why we made it a regular class, because then it's easy to hire me to teach it. So yeah, I regularly have a class of 40 students, and obviously can't bring 8 teams of 5 to the Ethics Bowl. So the standard way, the way I've had it best, is I give them all the cases before class starts, because we start late on the quarter system. And about 2 weeks in, I have everybody give a mini presentation on any case they want. And we do it all together as a group, and we talk and make a sort of democratic decision as a group about who belongs on the team. So the students get to anonymously vote. I've done this for years, and they basically almost never disagree with my judgment. Like when I go through and I'm judging who I think is best, the students anonymously, they'll all vote for themselves maybe, but it generally matches very closely. And so I always take ultimate responsibility, because I don't want them to fight with each other. I'm like, yes, I'm your instructor. It's my responsibility to say who's on the team. But I usually let them know that my judgment and their judgment agrees. So that's how I've dealt with that in the past.
And then how do you handle the grading of the students that don't participate?
Right. So at that point, I separate off the team in a separate process. I have a full syllabus for the work product of a student who's not on the team. And I'm happy to share it with folks if you want. So I tend to let the folks on the team use their participation on the team in place of some of the project I asked the other team members to do. So the people who aren't on the team, for example, have to facilitate classroom discussion in a way that I don't ask the team members to do, because their participation at the regional satisfies that. But yeah, I'm happy to share the syllabus I have with anyone who wants it.
That would be great. Larry, I think you were up next. You're on mute, Larry.
Sorry, yeah. So I've done this before on the happy occasions when I've had more students in the class than 5, or when we couldn't take 2 teams. the way it worked out in that case was there were two considerations. First of all, they all knew that I, as the coach, just like any coach in sports or whatever, picked the starting team, which in this case is the team. And the 5 students who showed the most during the course of the semester working on the cases, it was usually pretty clear that it wasn't, when there was a kind of a judgment call, then what would make the determination would be who gives us the best chance to win, which means you have to see who's prepared for what cases and do we have all 15 cases covered. You know, that would come into sort of determining, you know, who the 5 people are. But to me, and I can't imagine doing it any other way, really, is as the coach, I think of myself as the coach in that sense, not the coach in terms of coaching on what to say about the cases, because I really do try to keep myself out of that other than being the gadfly. But as far as the team, I'm the coach, and it was I never had that much trouble with it, really.
All right. Any other comments that anybody has on recruiting before we kind of move on? Yeah, Brian.
Just one idea. This is only one of about 7 competitions my ethics case team engages in. So part of the idea would be just to reach out and find some other opportunities. There's a competition called ICBC, which is in Canada, and they do have an ethics category, but they also have an HR category. They have a business policy category. Eller runs a really successful business ethics case competition. We also competed a competition called Templeton, which is in Stetson University. But part of the idea is for my ethics bowl group, I mean, they pretty much know this is what they're going to do for the year, and they hope to get the nationals. But the other members of the team know that there are various competitions where we'll send 2 students or 3 students, and that kind of helps spread the wealth, so to speak. It also helps when you have an ethics bowl student and maybe just says, wow, I'm taking a really hard course in the spring, I just can't continue to compete. Well, then you've got extra folks on your bench that you can pull in. But I would encourage folks maybe find some other potential ethics competitions to participate in.
Yeah, it's a great idea. All right, so another one of the questions that's oftentimes asked to me is, and I think that this is going to be particularly useful for the new coaches, is how do you start like on that first day? So we all know that, you know, the beginning of September, the regional cases drop. So I'm interested to know, maybe, especially some of the more experienced coaches, what are the strategies that you take on those first couple of weeks to really get the ball moving with your team, with the cases? We know when that case drop hits, it's a lot of information. There's a lot of cases there, a lot of information to go through. And so I'm curious if any of you have specific strategies that you might want to share with some of the newer coaches on how you approach really those first couple of weeks in terms of, you know, really getting the ball rolling. So if there is anyone that might want to chime in. Michael Norton.
Well, given that, unfortunately, over the past few years, I haven't had a lot of repeat team members. My teams have been typically all seniors almost every year. I feel like the top priorities I have in those first 2 weeks before the cases come out is to introduce the Ethics Bowl format to my new team members, and then to do some basic brushing up of theory and you know, building arguments, just like really basic stuff before we get into the more details throughout the semester. So for the first part of that anyway, what I'll do is I'll usually use a case from a previous year to show them, you know, this is what a case looks like. I'll show them all the materials about like the scoring sheets and criteria and all of that, and I'll have them watch a video of a full match. I think there are a lot of good videos, especially of the high school matches, just up online, so that they can get a feel of how Ethics Bowl really works.
Yeah, I think that's actually really important. I do that as well, is I always try to show at least one like full match, so they can get an idea of what it is that they're really getting into. I think there's a difference when you're explaining the way that the Ethics Bowl works versus the actual practicality and the practice of how that works. So I think that's a really great idea. John, you had your hand up a couple moments ago, John Garcia. No, you're good. All right, Larry.
Yeah, so first of all, I haven't watched the judge training video.
Yeah, that's the good one.
And I do all that stuff, yeah, although I really downplay the ethical theory stuff. But I do want them to know the difference between utilitarianism and Kant, but intuitively, that's the difference between consequences and what we call autonomy. And most of them know well enough, they can appreciate the rough distinction. And you don't need to get too much more than that, especially to get started, because then you can let it come in as you go through the cases. And so to me, it's pretty straightforward doing all that stuff, introducing Ethics Bowl. Again, I just want to now put my earlier question. I'm still trying to figure out, like, I'm thinking this year about telling them the very first week, if we're going to meet once a week, and usually that's what I get them for. Should I have them read all 15 cases the first week, and then we come back and figure out what to do with breaking them up? Or traditionally, and not because I thought it was particularly strategically great, we would do 5 cases, 5 cases, 5 cases, and then we would work on them more going forward. So I'm curious about getting things started in that way, whether a broad macro view of all 15 cases is a way to get going, or if there are other ways you break things up and sort of get things moving. I'm still looking for the answer there.
So one of the approaches that I take is, so like the first day we might go over 3 of the cases, then for the first couple of weeks, we'll just like pick a handful each time we meet. And the idea is to not really do a super deep dive, but to really kind of do a gut check. Like, let's read it. What do you think the most salient moral issues are? And how do you feel about it? Like, what's your initial response? Like, do you think it's a good thing, a bad thing? You know, and once we have made it through all of those cases, and then generally what we'll do is we'll start to divide up, okay, well, you know, you really liked these 2 cases. You're going to be the person that's going to be doing a little bit of the extra background research on this. You're going to bring that information in and present it to the rest of the team. And I really try to get students, especially they're going to be doing research, to be doing cases that they already had some type of really good reaction to. Right. And we all know that, you know, especially with like the regional cases as well as the national cases, you know, some of them are much more interesting than others, you know, so there seems to be kind of a variance with those. And so I try to get students linked to what they're interested in, because I want them to enjoy the research that they're doing. And then once we get through all of those, and we all kind of have kind of like that gut check on how we feel about it, and we've really kind of started to talk about more of the salient issues, then we'll start to do much more deeper dives, and then we'll start to do presentations, and we'll start to build on those. Right. So it's really kind of a process that we take, at least that I take, right, throughout the course of the semester.
So that's why I'm thinking, and you sort of put them both on the table here, because the way you described it is exactly the way I do it. And so I say the first 5 cases, and the first time through, we don't have to figure out what we want to say, but we want to figure out how we're going to work on it going forward. And so we have almost 15 weeks. And so it's 5 cases, 5 cases, 5 cases. But I'm thinking maybe right off the bat, the first week, in terms of them getting interested, having them not do a few cases to get started, but really saying, okay, everyone's going to read all 15 cases. And then we're going to go forward from there and let them participate in breaking them up for what we do the second week and how we structure. Has anyone ever done that? Go through all 15 cases to get started?
All right, Ron, did you want to jump in? I see your hand.
Yeah, actually, I did that last year, where we read all 15, and then we went through them, much like Michael and Larry have said, in more detail, but quickly. And one of the things I did this last fall, and I think it worked pretty well, was to try to come to a consensus about the right thing to say about each case. And we might go through 6 cases, 7 cases the first day, you know, but they all had them, and then come back and say, okay, do we want to fine tune this? How do we want to go after we've gone through those 15? Because those initial gut checks, as you said, you know, those are very valuable, and they 9 times out of 10, those are the right things to say. The only one that we had a problem with was the nursing one from last fall, that we had a couple of students go real hardcore, kill the witch, you know, kind of thing. That was, but besides that, everything was fine. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think somebody had earlier had mentioned, maybe is Deborah, I'm not sure, that oftentimes the students will disagree with one another. And so part of what we're doing as well is trying to come to some type of consensus, right? Because whatever the team is actually going to be presenting, you want everybody to be on that same page. So sometimes there are students that have to, kind of bend a little bit in terms of what that gut check is, to really kind of fit in with what the position of the team, ultimately is going to turn out to be. John Garcia.
Yeah,
It's actually Richard's question here. Yeah.
Yeah, so just a thought, people have talked about, how many cases do you do initially, and we go through them pretty slowly, right? Just first week, case 1, case 2, and so forth. And by the time we come back around to things, we've often forgot almost everything worthwhile that we said. So in recent years, I've developed the practice of starting a Google Doc that we just annotate like crazy with anything that seems important, bullet points of possible case questions, bullet points of arguments for, arguments against our position, questions about what our position is, notes about how it's changed over time. Anything, and also things about like who will take the lead, who will attempt to present arguments for the other side, and so forth. Annotate everything from the get-go, and then 8 weeks later, when you come back to that case, or 6 weeks later, you haven't lost everything and you're not starting from scratch.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, I like the idea of not just the Google Doc, but any kind of ways to build an accountability, because what we have sometimes is we'll have students, they'll show up and we'll say, okay, we're gonna talk about case 5 and 6 today. And 3 of the students are, oh yeah, can we read that? And it's like, oh, come on. And so if you can say, hey, have a type summary when you come in or something like that, that's helpful.
Yeah, and then the students can paste in their outlines, after we talk about it, and whoever's taking the lead will go home and, work on it more, and they can say, yeah, here's what I've added to this. It's a great way to keep track of all your stuff. It gets big, but it's better than relying on memory. At least at my age.
All right, Jess, and then we'll go to Marcia, and then Joe.
So I haven't tried this with me teaching, but back when I was coaching, which was years ago, when the cases would drop, we would have a very long meeting for the first pass at all the cases. And then everybody on the team would have like a pen color or a note card color. And for each case, they would write a thesis statement very quickly about that case, and they would give it to me. And then like when we would start the meeting, I would kind of go through it and I could find different like little points of disagreement just to get it in their heads. And it's just, I think, good to like have everybody just like look at every case and have like a first pass and like one big gnarly meeting. Cause then as the semesters goes on, if they see stuff in the news or if they see stuff in other cases that they think can relate, then they'll know what they don't know. And then they can, and like +1 to the Google Doc, and then they can put it into the Google Doc and they kind of know what's coming. And so it just like primes them to have a sense of like what's going to happen. And it's nice to do it where they come in with all of their little thesis statement cards, because then you kind of get an authentic view of like where they're coming from, and it combats against the kind of groupthink that can happen in the team. And I don't want people to feel like they kind of got groupthinked into saying stuff that they're not that committed to. And so that's how I used to do it. I have no idea how I'm going to do it in a class, but what it's worth.
All right, thank you. Marcia. You're muted.
Yeah, a note about disagreement. My students often disagree passionately, and sometimes the polarization increases as the semester goes on. So we don't try to reach a consensus, but for every case, there is a primary presenter. And the rest of the students on the team know that when the day of competition comes, they have to be ready to support the point of view of the person who has primary responsibility for the case. And they don't have any trouble doing it because they've heard both sides of the case.
Joe. Joe, we can't hear you.
How's that?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. So I've got a little bit of a different question. When I was coaching before at IU, one of the things that I really feel like we got bogged down in a lot, that I'm less and less convinced as time goes on was actually valuable, was we would get into the weeds of a lot of factual stuff during practice. And one of the things that I'm aware of is that I'm going to have less time with my students than I've been accustomed to. And so I'm trying to think about how to make better use out of the practice time that we've got. And so I'm wondering, have other folks had this same experience? And if so, can we talk about maybe some effective strategies for how to avoid it? How to avoid just getting bogged down in like, you know, we talk a lot about Ethics Bowl is not Moral Theory Bowl. I had students who love to treat Ethics Bowl as fact memorization bowl. And I'm trying to figure out how to, like I say, just keep students out of those weeds, because I don't feel like it's a valuable use of the very, very compressed time that we've got.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Jess, did you want to jump in on that? I saw your hand come up again.
Yes. So I've also encountered this, and I can tell you what I do, which is that I put in the chat a thing that's like double crux. And the idea is, if you're going to be bringing in empirical information, you should bring it in with the mind of, how does this empirical information bear on the crux of a disagreement? So like, what is it such that if I were right about the empirics about it, then you would have to change your mind. And if you were right about the empirical situation, then I would have to change my mind. And focus on like, why is this empirical detail relevant to locating the crux of the disagreement, where both interlocutors in the disagreement will agree that that's the crux of the disagreement. Because often one side of the disagreement thinks that some empirical thing is super relevant, but that's like absolutely not what the other side of the disagreement even cares about. It's like irrelevant. And if it's not a double crux, like if it's not something that both people think, an empirical consideration that both of them think it hangs on, then you just don't need it for your argument, because it's like, it's not engaging with your interlocutor in the right way. And so when students bring me empirical information, I try to always have them frame it in terms of cruxes. And that's a way of like focusing the debate a little bit.
Does anybody have anything that they want to say about that particular issue? Looking for hands. Yeah, so I'll just say really quickly, oftentimes Joe, what happens then, it almost sounds like it becomes like the research bowl, right? Because you're just like getting this like dump of data. And so one of the things that I always try to do with my students, very similar to Jess, is really get them to really think about what is the moral relevance of that particular data, and how does that really fit into what the really ethical tension is in that. And you know, I've judged for a very long time, and you oftentimes see teams do this, where it just becomes really who did more research, and they really kind of miss, I think, the ethical implications of that in relation to the question or in relation to the case. And so even when I'm judging, I'm always trying to bring students back to, okay, well, you know, you gave me a lot of data, but, you know, help me understand what the moral significance of that is in relation to the particular, you know, question or the particular issue that we're dealing with. All right, any other comments on that particular issue? Hey, John, how much time do we have, by the way? John Garcia, are you there? I think we have like about 4 minutes. Okay, so one other quickly thing that some of you might want to talk about really quick is the difference in approach of presentation. So one of the things that Marcia made reference to is that, you know, she'll have like one main presenter. And as we've seen from nationals and the regionals over the last number of years, is that different teams strategize a little bit differently in terms of the way that they present their presentations, whether or not it's one person that's the primary talker, whether or not there's the intro person, you know, that kind of sets up what the outline is going to be. And then, you know, going on to what some of the arguments are, the counter arguments, so on and so forth. And so are there some of you that have different preferences in terms of how you want your students to approach giving the presentation, whereas all 5 or 6 people participate or only just a couple? So it'd be interesting to see kind of what some of your approaches are. And so I see Marcia's hand. We'll start with you.
Yeah, even though there's one student who's the primary person who puts the case together, I've learned over the years that having more than one speaker is much more effective than just one. And I think part of it is that judges have, and I've been a judge, so there's no criticism intended, have a hard time paying attention to one person droning on for 7 or 10 minutes. And so I think the change in voices and personalities and ways of delivering information is very helpful, at least to keeping attention. So that's what we've been doing in recent years. And you saw 3 of my team presenting earlier, and each of them spoke. So
Ron.
Yeah, what Marcia said, but also I've seen if you have if the team is prepared and understands that everybody or mostly everybody is going to speak, then you avoid this trap of when you've got one person doing the whole thing and they go off the rails and there's no preparation for somebody to come in and step in. I know that we won the 2-year bowl a couple of years ago because the opposing team had one of those situations where the lead guy just was wrong. And I mean, really diehard committed to it. Somebody needed to step in, but they weren't prepared to do that. So that was a problem.
Larry, do you want to get the last word in here? Because I think we're almost to the end of this session. And then we'll go to Suzanne as well. We can get both of you guys in.
Actually, it's Marcia's last word in that regard. Because you said some years ago, you're only as good as your weakest case. And I had a team that would have made nationals, except for they got their weakest case.
Yeah.
And in the other rounds, they were really good. And in the other part of that round, they were really good. So I think it's important that everyone has to be prepared to pitch in because the other thing I think is you can't really prepare for the asking questions of the other team. And so the more people have their heads into the case, the more people will come up with something to ask about. And preparing to present, we tend to focus on that, but it's, they have to be good at asking questions too. And that's not easy to prepare for. I can't figure out that.
Well, one of the things that I always tell my students is that so much of the ethics bowl is really about listening. It's about listening to what it is that the other team is actually saying and then responding accordingly. Right. And so it's helpful when you have all 5 or 6 members of your team that are really diligently listening in order to be able to do that commentary. So Suzanne, we'll give you the last comment before we take, I think, the next break.
Well, it's an observation. So this spring really was the first time I was exposed to the Ethics Bowl concept and everything. I was just a member of the audience. But I had with me a colleague, well, a friend from, I think it's the University of Virginia or Virginia Tech University. And he was offering quiet running commentary as the matches went on, so I could understand what was going on. And this was the runner-up team for last year. They came second, or this academic year. They were a team of 4, but there was only one female that kept answering all the questions. And he said to me, because she's clearly the brain of the group, it's not a nice thing to say, but that's how it comes across. I mean, how do coaches work on that?
Anybody want to try to give that one a go? Yeah, Brian.
And I'll give it a go. I think part of it comes down to, do you want to win or do you want to have this be a developmental experience for everybody on your team? I mean, if I had LeBron James, he's getting the ball every single time because I want to win the championship. But if it's my job to develop all my players, then I approach it a little bit differently. So I really think one effective approach is to simply say, hey, you're a team of 4 or 5 or 6, whatever the number is, and your job is to play case 4. Your team depends on you to play case 4. So my guess is this one team, she was the spokesperson, probably she put in the most work and knew the most. But if you tell teammates, hey, you know what? If it's case 4, you've got to be our lead person, you know the most. I mean, I watched her compete and she was amazing. But I'm not sure that her other teammates could not have been as effective. Maybe they just weren't given the chance to get off the bench and play.
All right. So Kristen, are we out of time?
Yeah, we are.
Oh, there's John. He's back.
Sorry, I had to go get our food. We are out of time, but this is a nice opportunity to plug the next session, which is preparing for a session tomorrow. Because what we're going to do tomorrow is sort of have an open session where we could follow up on part of these conversations that we've had today or talk about other things that are not part of the formal programming. So what Richard's going to do in our next session is start gathering some of that input and getting a sense of what people are going to want to talk about during our open session tomorrow. Some of you have been in the in-person workshop in the past. This is what we call the unconference session, where we sort of get together and brainstorm ideas and then have an opportunity to break out. So I know it felt like some of these sessions have sort of, we're still rolling and then we've stopped. So maybe that'll be a chance to talk more about some of these issues, both coming up in our next session and then tomorrow as well. But yeah, thanks to all of you and thanks to Michael for, where'd he go? For facilitating. Oh, there he is. Hey, Mike. And we'll see everyone in a few minutes.